In the next 4 videos, I'm going to give you 4 principles that if you apply them to your practicing, you will get 10 times the results. And it sounds like hype, it sounds like clickbait, right? But the least you can do is hear me out. Because I think over the next 2 minutes, you'll actually agree with me that maybe there's a chance that you can develop 10 times faster. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about principles. And what is that? Well, it's just stuff that you see in the world, right? Like gravity. It's a law. It's a rule. And if you follow gravity, if you work with gravity, right, then you will get results. If you don't, then you won't, right? Is it, okay, I can fly. I don't care about gravity. And then you jump off a building and you go splat, right? That's not working with the principles of what is going on around you. The same thing goes here. Like, say you want to grow a plant, just to look at something else than guitar playing, because that makes sense. If you start looking at other areas, what we do on the guitar is just hilarious, right? You want to grow a plant and you take it home. You have no idea what plant it is. You don't know how much water it needs. You don't know what nutrients. You don't know if it can take standing in direct sunlight or you have to keep it in the shade. You have no idea. And what are your chances of growing that plant to its highest potential? What does that mean, highest potential? It means that you give it just the right amount of nutrients and just the right amount of direct and indirect sunlight and just the right amount of moist and whatever and wind and, is it outside? What degrees do you have to, does it have to be warm or cold? Do you have to put it outside of your house or inside? What chances are there that you're actually going to treat that plant and make it grow the fastest way possible, right? 0. That's what, right? You need knowledge. You need to know what you're doing, right? The same thing goes when you're practicing. We just play something, you show people something, then you go home and practice that a lot, right? We know that plants need water. Okay, go home and water that plant a lot. What is going to happen? The plant is going to die. That's what's going to happen. What are you going to do when you come home with that advice? Practice, practice, practice. Is that you're going to die. Not quite, but your motivation, your enthusiasm is going to die. Why? Because you'll be struggling, right? You'll be struggling to keep that plant alive, to make it grow, if you don't know the principles of growth and you know exactly what that plant needs. So if we study what actually goes on inside the body and brain when you practice and we seek to get to your highest potential of learning in the fastest way possible, by studying that, see what do you need in order to get to where you want to go the fastest way possible, then we can, right? Then we can use our fullest potential of learning. And why is that important? Because it's fun, right? Because most people say, I don't need to learn that fast, Claus, I'm having fun. What is that all about speed? Are you impatient? Yes, I'm impatient. Of course I want results. Wouldn't you rather develop twice as fast as, twice as slow, right? It just doesn't make sense. And anyone, even if you're into, just having fun playing, you need to develop fast, because the faster you develop, the more results you get and the more fun it is, right? And the more freedom you have when you play, the more you can express yourself when you're playing music. So this is important. And in the next 4 videos, this included, I'm going to give you the 4 most important principles that if you follow them, you will absolutely boost your results beyond anything that you have experienced so far. And what does that mean to follow them? It means that you work on applying them every single day. You have to practice applying them and getting better at applying them. And the first thing we're going to look at is what we call the Pareto principle. It's a guy called Wilfredo Pareto. And if you know this concept already, please listen anyway. Because we can never get enough of applying this principle. It's a mathematician who years ago, like a long time ago, discovered that 20% of the stocks deliver 80% of the result if you invest in stocks, right? You buy a lot of stocks and, out of those stocks, 20% will deliver 80% of the return on investment. If you look at a sports team, 20% of the players will deliver 80% of the results, right? That goalkeeper who keeps every goal out, that guy in the front who scores the goal, if he gets the ball, chances are he's going to put it in there. We got those stars in every trade, right? Why do we have stars? Because there are some people who perform better than most people. Just how it is, and we attribute that to talent, right? These 4 videos is about talent. It's about building talent to be that guy who develops much faster. But if you look at sports, it's the same thing. You got 20% delivering 80% of the results. And why are those players, why do they make 10 times the other players, right? Absurd amounts in salaries. Exactly, that's why, right? Same thing in boxing, same thing in other areas of life. I actually wrote a couple of other areas down here. I got them on my iPad. See if I can find them, if I remember them all. We got the organization. In organizations, 20% of people are responsible for 80% of the decisions they make, right? We got the top people, and then we got the influences of the top people. And then we got the 80% who's kind of just hanging out, right? That's just how it is. There's nothing wrong with any of this. It's just how it is, how things always end up. Yeah, it's just amazing. We got the investment analogy, we got everything, the sports analogy. But and you can start looking for that principle. That's the method of being good at practicing, is looking for these principles, because the more proof you find around what goes on you, in what goes on you, around you, then the more convinced you get that this is true. And then you keep looking for the 20% of stuff you do on this instrument that gives you 80% of the results. What is that about? Right? That's a thought, isn't it? Okay, so 20% of what I practice is going to mean 80% of getting to my destination. That also means that 80% of your time is a relative waste of time practicing. Is that really true? Is it? Could that be true? Right? That's an intelligent question to ask yourself, because then you can start searching and saying, okay, if that was true, what are the 20% of time I spent that accounts for 80% of my results? Right? Some people, and this is different for everyone, for some people it's, well, I'm basically dabbling most of the time. Am I not? Am I not really not being focused on what I do most of the time? So the 20% I spent with the metronome on my little project with whatever, picking, whatever, that's the 20%. Could I expand that and get more of the 20%? And I got a little tip for you. Once you expand that, once everything is 20%, the 20%, the most effective, then out of that, 20% of that practicing accounts for 80% of your results. It never ends. So this is a principle of constant improving your practice regimen. But this works on the most overall basis of playing guitar. Like you got chords, if you divide all the elements of practicing, right? You got chords, you need to practice some chords to enable to be a well-rounded musician, right? You need to practice chords. You got bar chords, you got open string chords, you got 4-note chords, where instead of using bars, you actually just have one note per finger. Like on a piano. Those are another group of chords. What should you practice? What are the 20% of chords right where you are now that's going to mean 80% to your development when it comes to chords? Right? Are there some basic movements that you could do? Are there some chords that you could play over and over again? Just 20% of them. Of what you usually practice. That would mean that everything else when it comes to chords and navigating these chord shapes would be extremely easier or much easier. Sorry for my bad English at times. When it comes to techniques, right, that's another area. You got picking technique, you got left hand, right hand, you got hammer-ons and pull-offs, you got sweep picking, you got all kinds of stuff. You got rhythm when it comes to music, right? Just being able to tap any rhythm. That's a fundamental 50% musician skill, right, that we have to practice. We got so many things going on. We got scales, right? We got music theory, understanding chords, understanding scales, understanding what scales to use over what music. Got so many things going on. And out of those things, what are the 20% of things that you could practice right now that would give you 80% of the results? Just asking yourself that question and attempting to answer it on a regular basis will make you twice as effective, at least when you practice. Because suddenly you start engaging something called intelligence, right? Instead of just practicing whatever, you actually start being conscious about what am I practicing and what has the greatest impact on my overall skill level, right? And it doesn't stop there, because that's the overall, thing with practicing guitar. But when you then dive into, let's say, technique, right? What technique would mean most to your development? What are the 20% of exercises you could do? Is it legato, hammer-ons and pull-offs? Is it sweep picking? Is it alternate picking? What is it? What technique is it that would mean 80%? What is the 20% of technical area that would really mean a lot to you? And I would say, just to give you a hint, that in the beginning, if you really want to be able to that's another principle we're going to talk about, where you want to go, right? But let's say you want to really be good at playing solos. In what style of music? We have to know that as well. But so we can aim at the right thing. But let's say that, there's no reason to learn every scale in the universe. That's just going to be the 80% that means 20%, right? What you need to do is that you need to be so good at playing the first position minor pentatonic and expanding that, or maybe another position, as we've been talking about in some of the other videos on YouTube. You need to focus, right, on the 20%. That means 80% of the result of where you want to go. How fast can I get to that point? What is that point exactly? But then once you're into that specific technique, you get crazy by thinking like this, right? For until you get used to it. When you get into that technique, and we're developing, like say, we're focusing on alternate picking, if we decide that that's the 20% of technical exercises that will mean most to my development, the 80%, then what is it within alternate picking practicing that will mean more to your development? Now you might go, oh, Claus, shut up. I'm just going to go back to practicing in a normal way, right? But you start at the top level, and then you get results by thinking like that. And the more results you get, the more intrigued you get. And the more you get like, what else can I do with thinking with this simple principle? And then you dive even deeper and deeper and deeper until you're just doing one thing, right? You've honed in on exactly the right thing. Because if you do this on every level, on the overall guitar skills level, what's the most important skill? What's the 20% of skills that will mean 80% of the result of where I want to go? And then within that skill, what's the 20% that means 80%? And within that, as soon as you do this, you get so many results and you start really developing rapidly that you can apply this to every level of practicing. And that is a tool of intelligence. Going home with the overall notion to practice that a lot is not intelligent. It isn't. It's like taking a plant home and saying, what do plants need? They need nutrients and water. So you give them all the nutrients you can and fully overload it, and you give them too much water, which kills the plant. It's exactly the same process. When you develop your skills on this instrument, you basically do it in a state of confusion, right? You don't know exactly if what you're doing is the right thing. At least that was what it was for me. I missed the formula of what to do and how to think about practicing that would give me fast results, and I didn't have one. So I was confused all the time, and I sense that a lot of my students are as well. We don't know exactly if we're doing the right thing. But you can, by using these principles, you can ask yourself the same question over and over again, and I really recommend that you start doing that right now. You download the flashcards below here and the desktop background so you can put it where you will see it all the time. Once you have 4 flashcards, you can just create a little directory, a little library of them in your photos, whatever, on your iPad, iPhone, Android device. And then multiple times a day, you can just circle, see if you can remember them first. And then you go through them over and over and over again. And by the end of these 4 days, we'll build a screensaver for you, for your computer. So every time you return back to it, you'll see these 4 principles circulated like that. This is very valuable because you need to repeat them over and over. Like anything on the instrument, you need to do it with your mind as well. In order for you to, every time you think about practicing, these 4 principles becomes part of your process, and that makes up, or they influence the decisions you make about what to practice and how to practice. Okay? So this is so valuable, and I really urge you to try it out and see what results you get. But there's a shortcut you can use, right? Because to really doing this, because it's really hard to see whether you're doing the right thing or not. Or you can try, right? But you can also have a teacher who's been there before you, who could look back and look at you and say, with my experience, I think the 20% that you're missing, or that you could be practicing all the time, is X, right? And that can be super valuable. That can make you skip like months of trying to develop in a certain area. And that's what we're going to do for you in the Platinum Club, or the Platinum Club. And we're simply personally going to take you by the hand, analyze your playing, how we're going to do that, and how you're going to help us do that on a very personal level is something that we're going to talk about in the last video. So until then, please apply this principle. Please watch this video again. Think about how that principle actually applies to everything around you, and how absurd it is that you're not applying it to your practicing when it's a rule of the universe or the planet Earth, growth in any area, right? how absurd it is to not be thinking, what is the 20% of my time? And I promise you, just by asking the question and just attempting to answer it, you are going to be more productive instantly. I promise, right? Okay, so stay tuned for tomorrow's video, and you can see the subject line right up there in lesson 2 here. I really hope to see you and that you'll stick to this little test here, because what we're working on is getting 10 times the results. And you really can if you'll give it a try and stick to these 4 principles. Download the flashcards and the desktop saver. Do something right now. Act upon this, because just 2 minutes of action or 1 minute of action of downloading it, getting it into your phone, whatever, and on your iPad, on your computer, will make a difference, right? For the future. So make a decision and act on this right now, and I'll see you tomorrow.